We're excited to be joined this morning by Logan Phillips. He is the founder of Race to the White House, which is an electoral prediction model. Great to see you, Logan.
Good to see you, man.
Hey, great to see you guys too. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. So first time on the show, just give people a little bit of a sense of who you are and how this model is designed and how it functions.
Yeah, so I forecast elections for Race to the White House and track polling for every major federal race in the country. And the goal of my site, in addition to ideally getting these predictions right, is to help make sense of the chaos and make it as easy for people to understand which races are the most competitive, and in the presidential race, which states are most likely to determine the outcome. And so my goal is to make it so anyone who comes to the site for the first time within 30 or seconds or so will have a much better sense of this central factors that are going to determine the race.
So let's go ahead and put up on the screen the graphic of where things stand right now in terms of the Electoral College. Your prediction is that there's a 56.9% chance that Kamala wins, a 42.8% chance that Trump wins. Those are still pretty good odds for Trump, even with Kamala somewhat favored there. And you've got projected electoral votes, Kamala at 284.4 and Trump at 253.6. How should we think about those odds, and what are some of the factors that are leading your model to give Kamala a bit of an edge here?
Yeah, I would say that basically means it's a toss-up. And the problem here is that we have two different factors, right? We have the national polling, which is pretty competitive and would say maybe up until about a few days ago when Kamala got a little bit of a post-debate bounce that Donald Trump would be favored. If we look at what happened in the 2020 electoral map, which was heavily biased to Republicans in terms of the Electoral College. But then the state polls for Kamala Harris have been really, really strong. In some states like Michigan, Wisconsin, she's usually been doing better in the state polls than even the national polls. And so the question here is, which is real? Has Kamala really is doing that much better than Joe Biden to the point that the Electoral College disadvantage is significantly smaller? And if that's the case, then she is outright favored to win. And I think because you have that disparity, it's probably part of the reason why some models like Nate Silver's show Donald Trump favored, because they're probably assuming a lot more about the 2020 electoral map still being in place. But this is definitely a really close election. Now, Harris will, at least in my model, start to edge ahead if she has the same type of bounce in the state polls that we're seeing in the national polls. There's just been a real dearth of polling outside of some GOP-aligned pollsters since the debate.
So, Logan, give us a sense of, you were talking there about the difference between you and Nate Silver. A lot of people obviously wonder about the individual mechanics. So as close as you can to relatable speak, just give us a sense of what the difference is and the factors that you look at that can help people assess whenever they're looking at, let's say, your model at a different model. What are the types of things that you weight, how much weight to give them, and give us your overall thought process?
Yeah, so I think across the board for almost all of our models, there's a few different things it does, right? First, you try to assess what the national environment is. And for me, I use polling, I use the economy. Those are by far the two most important. I also look at how special elections have been going lately and which party has been overperforming expectations. And a tiny, like 1% of it is fundraising. And after we have a sense of what the national environment is, we try to turn that into state numbers, right? So we look at how states have voted in recent elections relative to the popular vote. So if it's been a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, you'd assume like if it's a state that's 2 points to the left, Democrats are up by 4 nationally, they vote for Harris by 6 points. And you combine that with the state polls to give an overall projection for each state. And then the final component, which I think is honestly one of the most important, is you try to figure out how likely are you to be wrong in every state, right? So that's based off of like the information we have and how far away we are from election day. How off on average would the model be? And to do that, you got to look at electoral history. For me, I look at like every election since the 1960s. And that helps us get a sense of the chance of an upset. And then the final additional part after you project the lead for each state is you then simulate all of the states together to figure out what the chance Kamala and Trump have nationwide. And so you have to see like some, if you overperform in Michigan, you're probably going to overperform in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin too. So you try to calculate how correlated each state is as well.
How are you thinking about a potential polling miss? So, 2016, Trump support is understated. 2020 Trump support is understated. 2022 Republican support is overstated. The special elections, it seemed like Democratic support was understated. So, just looking at the track record as a layperson, it seems like you got a lot of contradictory indications. How are you thinking about that in terms of your statistical modeling?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And it's very easy to fall into the trap after 2020 and 2016 to just assume it's going to go against Donald Trump. I think that's what ARP-CP did to a degree in 2022, and it really backfired for them. Because the reality is that past polling misses aren't usually predictive directionally of future polling misses. But I do think it's fair to say after 2020 and 2016, in which were both really bad misses for presidential polls, especially 2020, that we can have a little more uncertainty than we would normally. Polling is way harder than it used to be. The response rate for polls that are calling people is drastically lower. And it makes basic sense for all of us, right? Because if you're getting a phone call from a random number, more often than not, it's going to be someone not even trying to sell you something, but trying to scam you into something. And so as a result, pollsters have to find new and creative ways to reach voters. Sometimes they're doing online polls. That's a huge part of how polls work now. Sometimes they're text polls. But overall, they're still kind of figuring out how to adjust to the new world. So for my models, I increase the uncertainty quite a bit. I think that the odds of a miss are higher right now. But I'm not going to say that it's necessarily going to go for or against Trump. I mean, there's also capitalist incentives here, right? Pollsters' goal is to get as accurate as possible. They make more money if they do well on that front. The whole industry will be badly off and have a lot less trust in them if they underrate Trump specifically. So on one hand, they could miss him because they've done it before. On the other hand, they could overcorrect too.
Right. So factoring in 2022, like you were just talking about, what was the mistake that pollsters made? Because a lot of people forget, after 2016, there was a lot of discussion about not polling enough white-collar workers, white working-class workers specifically. After 2020, I believe the excuse was that there were too many older Democrats at home. They were responding. It was like a polling response bias. 2022, I haven't heard a particularly good, actual analysis of what went wrong. So what, in your opinion, what went wrong with the polls for there?
Well, I would just say, in fairness to pollsters, 2022 was a pretty good year for them.
Okay.
There's usually going to be a bias against one party or the other, and that year was against Democrats. But overall, they were pretty good. They lightly underrated youth turnout. And honestly, my gut feeling is that overall, they all had to make corrections after the last two presidential cycles, and they may have overdone it a little bit just because it was in their incentives to not underrate Republicans again. But it was still a pretty good year for them.
Okay.
What do you make of, this is something I hear from like the resistance libs, right? Which, sometimes they have a point. So we like to take them seriously if they're making a good argument, that there's been an influx of these Republican aligned pollsters who are more interested in their capitalist incentive, we may say, is more about setting a pro-Republican narrative than it is about being wholly accurate. And, so for people who want to discount Nate Silver's model, looking at, which has Donald Trump still favored, is kind of like the inverse of where your model sits. That's one of the things that they'll point to, is that he takes that flood of GOP aligned polls sort of too seriously in terms of his modeling.
Yeah, it's a huge concern. In 2022, I had to call a bit of an audible and start increasing the penalty to partisan pollsters once they really started to flood the average. There's a lot more polls for the presidential, so we'll see if it gets to that point. But it's certainly been the case lately in the post-debate state polls, because they seem to be the only ones releasing polls. I would say if all these pollsters, as with anyone that has power or influence, right, you got to think about what their incentives are. And just like you said, right, their goal is to try to change the narrative. That's true for any internal poll. No campaign is going to release a poll just for the heck of it. If they have a poll and it's a Democrat-aligned pollster that's showing them way worse than everyone else, maybe the race closer than everyone else, they might be using it for fundraising purposes, and then they just put it out there publicly so they can cite it in ads, right? There's usually going to be some type of agenda.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed talking to you, Logan. Thanks for coming on, man. And we'll continue to check out your website.
Yeah,
right,
great
guys,
to meet you, Logan. Our pleasure.
Great to meet you too.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.